It's the Brian Lehrer Show on WNYC. Good morning, everyone. Live from the Green Space today, WNYC's street-facing theater in our building at 160 Varick Street. We have about 100 audience members who've come to watch us do the Brian Lehrer Show today. So welcome to all of you. Give yourselves a round of applause. So easy to get people to applaud for themselves. And they are all WNYC sustaining members, too, I understand. So we should all give them a round of applause. And thanks for your support. And welcome back to all our listeners on the radio and online this morning. And remember, folks, when we're in the green space, you can see the show as well as listen to it. We are live video streaming when we're in the green space. Find the stream at thegreenspace.org. That's green with an E at the end. thegreenspace.org for our live video stream, and we thank the Jerome L. Green Foundation for their eternal support for the Jerome L. Green Performance Space. Coming up live from the Green Space this morning, can developers' profits and affordable housing coexist? As part of our People's Guide to Power series, Real Estate Edition, we'll talk to a representative of for-profit and not-for-profit developers. How do you make money from affordable housing and still keep it affordable? Or where does enough money come from for affordable housing without the profit motive? Also this morning, something very special. This election day, one of your most important decisions, if you vote in New York State, will be yes or no to a state constitutional convention. Did you know this? Most people have not even heard of this yet. Progressives are divided. Some see opportunities, others see mostly risks. We will have a debate live on the Green Space stage in conjunction with the Intelligence Squared debate organizers, yes or no to a New York State constitutional convention. And what we want you to do, if you're listening right now and you have an opinion on this going into the debate today, yes or no on a New York State constitutional convention, if you've already heard anything about it and you have an opinion that you've been forming, we want you to go to the Intelligence Squared website now and vote on how you would vote. And then at the end of the debate, you're going to have an opportunity to vote again, and we're going to measure how many people's minds were changed in one direction or another. It's very interesting, these IQ squared debates, and it's one measure of public opinion. It's not a scientific sample, but it is a number of people who come in with an opinion on an issue. Do they go out with the same opinion? It's deliberative democracy in action. So go to iq2us.org/vote. That's the website. IQ2 for Intelligence Squared, IQ2us.org/vote, IQ2us.org/vote, and cast that vote for how you would vote today on a constitutional convention for New York State, yes or no. We'll give you another opportunity to hear this before we actually start the debate later in the program, and then listen to inform your vote this election day on this question with potentially vast implications. Our first guests joining us right now, Clare Malone from 538. She is senior political writer for the website that does political and sports and other kinds of statistical analysis, 538. She's been writing lately about the 2018 midterm elections, which would change things a lot if the Democrats take control of either house or if the Republicans elect more Roy Moores. And just this morning, CNN has an article, Trump allies worry that losing the House means impeachment. Here was Steve Bannon over the weekend helping to roll the dice to promote more nationalist candidates like Roy Moore.
There's a time and season for everything. And right now, it's a season of war against a GOP establishment.
Hashtag war. So Clare Malone from 538 is with us. Some of Clare Malone's recent articles, 3 ways to look at Bob Corker's retirement, just as the Tennessee Republican is upping his game and calling Donald Trump a risk of starting World War III and someone in need of adult daycare. I'm sure you heard that. Also, how the GOP's identity crisis is shaking up some other Senate races, and on the other side of the aisle, why Democratic lion Dianne Feinstein may not be safe in her reelection next year. Also with us, Philip Bump, correspondent for The Washington Post, following the big national politics stories every day. Right now, one of the big stories is Trump undoing so many big Obama policies all at once. It seems the clean power plant rules, DACA, Obamacare, cost-sharing subsidies for low-income insurance buyers, the Iran nuclear arms deal. The world is noticing Monday through Friday and on Saturday night. All right, we'll get that Saturday night clip eventually. Claire, one of your recent articles is 3 ways to read Senator Bob Corker's retirement. And again, Corker is the conservative Republican Tennessee senator who is now taken to questioning Trump's stability and competence. He used those words, stability and competence, accusing Trump, as I said, of threatening World War III in the way he's approaching North Korea and saying he needs adult daycare. That would seem to go with your scenario number 3, Corker's take 'em down with me mission.
Yeah.
Want to lay it out?
Kamikaze Corker. I think that someone like Bob Corker, there have been a series of GOP senators who have come in Trump's crosshair, and Bob Corker is sort of only the most recent. He spoke out pretty vocally after the Charlottesville events, and I think in general had sort of been looking at the political landscape, perhaps looking at someone like Jeff Flake in Arizona, who's facing a very stiff primary challenge from Kelly Ward. And I think Corker perhaps took a step back and thought, do I want to run for Senate again in this environment? And if I don't, what's the best course of action? He obviously doesn't like Trump personally. He was passed over to be Secretary of State and has sort of in incremental fashion been more vocal about his criticism of the president. So I think you might see someone like, you see McCain and Flake and Corker, they're all of a kind. And they're just, Corker's only the most recent one in the news to sort of be this more establishment Republican speaking up against Trump.
By the way, I think now we can say, before we get too far from it, that people have been noticing all these things about the Obama legacy that Trump has been changing Monday through Friday and noticing on Saturday night.
It's been a big week, folks. We're getting rid of everything Obama did, healthcare, the Iran deal, and we're ripping out all the vegetables in Michelle Obama's garden and planting McNuggets. McNuggets. Love the McNuggets.
Alec Baldwin as Trump on Saturday Night Live. Philip Bump, what's with all this Obama policy undoing seeming to bunch up together? Is it a coincidence of when some various deadlines are, or is this how Trump is trying to energize his base right at this moment, because he seems to be on a permanent crusade to energize his base?
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's the only people who really like him are his base, right? So he keeps doing what he can to make them happy. I mean, I think it's important to remember that Donald Trump's political ideology was essentially formed by his paying attention to Fox News and paying attention to conservative media. He believes, I think, that all of these things were net negatives. He doesn't, I believe, and I think Bob Corker would probably agree, he doesn't have a particularly nuanced understanding of what Obamacare does, what its problems are, and what its successes are. And I think that what he's doing then is he has this sense that all these things are generally bad, and so he can do some things to undercut them, which he's doing. There's sort of been this tacit understanding that when a new president comes in, you don't rip everything out by the roots because it leads to some instability in the country. Donald Trump doesn't seem to be particularly beholden to that. And so what he's doing is he is doing what he can to undo the things that he thinks are bad, even while he may not totally understand what the long-term implications may be.
And Claire, your scenario number 1 on why Corker is retiring right now and pairing it with all this really tough anti-Trump language, so tough compared to other Republicans. One is that this is the one that Bannon would like to see, the establishment collapse narrative, you call it. And here is Bannon one more time from a speech over the weekend to the so-called Values Voters Summit, seeming to take aim directly at Corker's insults.
As Bob Corker has trashed the commander-in-chief of our armed forces while we have young men and women in harm's way, right? Well, he said he's leading them on a path to World War III, that he is not stable, that people have to keep him moderated, that it's an adult center, and they took the morning shift off. Why some U.S. senator in a position of that authority, for the first time in the history of our republic, has mocked and ridiculed a commander-in-chief when we have kids in the field?
Going right after Corker there.
He sure is.
And that he would hope to bring about what you call the establishment collapse narrative. What's that?
Well, Bannon and a couple of super PACs, there's a PAC called the Great America Alliance, have sort of honed in on most GOP Senate seats that are up in 2018. And basically they're putting Trump, Bannon candidates in the field. So Marsha Blackburn, who's now stepped in Tennessee, I recommend the audience go watch her ad. It's actually a good political ad. She sort of says, I'm a gun-toting conservative and proud of it. She's currently a member of the House. But Bannon is supporting candidates who are stylistically Trumpian, is how I would put it. They don't all necessarily have, Steve Bannon's political views about trade, let's say. But he's asking candidates to run in places somewhere like Wyoming, which I don't think any of us thought of until a couple weeks ago as a place that would maybe be a primary challenge in play. He's asking Eric Prince of Blackwater to take a look. And so there are places all over the country where Bannon says, hey, we've got a moment. Maybe these candidates that were seen as fringe even a year ago could really make hay in 2018.
And Philip, what's your sense of the impact of Corker going so hard against Trump and announcing his retirement at the same time, his impact on Trump's power with other Republicans in the Senate, and his impact on the fate of the Senate 2018? He certainly has the Bannon wing energized for a backlash, as we hear.
Yeah, I mean, Bob Corker was in a pretty common position among Republican establishment members last year, which is that he wanted to support his party's candidate. He felt as though he could probably be corralled, that it wouldn't really be that bad, that eventually he got on board and wanted to support Trump. As Claire mentioned, things went south. And I think that he is seeing this as an opportunity to sort of make amends for what he had done. I think it's important we remember that he was supportive of Donald Trump last year. But I mean, the question that we have with Bob Corker and with a lot of these other races, with Bannon's whole theme of I'm going to get people elected, which let's bear in mind, he came on board Donald Trump late in the campaign. He came on board with Moore late in the campaign. He doesn't really have a track record of showing he can win races, although these PACs, of course, change the dynamic to some extent. But this is going to be a very conservative electorate. And so this is exactly the sort of electorate. We always see more conservative Republicans come out to vote than are part of the actual Republican population in a place during a Republican primary. So it's a more conservative electorate. They're going to be more amenable to this sort of to hell with the Republican establishment call to action, whatever it means. I mean, that Bannon is supporting Michael Grimm in Staten Island. I mean, he's Trumpian only in the fact that he wants to beat people up, right? I mean, this is, that Bannon doesn't, to Claire's point, doesn't have a consistent ideology, but this moment is the right moment. People are fired up, people are excited about Donald Trump, and more conservatives are going to come out next year, and that's scary to all the establishment.
For people who don't know that reference, Michael Grimm, I guess when he was previously the congressman from Staten Island, threatened to beat up New York One reporter Michael Scotto.
That's right.
And he's got other things like, did he get convicted?
He was.
He was also in jail. That's the second mention on the list. He's also
not of such great significance to Steve Bannon, I guess.
Right.
Now, those of you here in the green space, if you have a question about these kinds of national politics things that we're talking about right now, or a brief comment, raise your hand. We have a microphone that'll come around. We have a person who will come around with a microphone to give human beings who work here their credit. And listeners at home, or those of you watching us on the video stream at thegreenspace.org, you can call in 212-433-WNYC, 212-433-9692. And we're going to go to a caller right now who I think has a pertinent question to what we were just talking about. No, not Michael Grimm, before that. Sharon in Manhattan, you're on WNYC. Hi, Sharon. Thank you for calling.
Good morning. Thank you very much for taking the call. I would like to know why the premise for discussion of Trump's possibility of getting any legislation across always has to be about his base. They don't represent most of Americans, and yet still people talk about the base. He's doing this for his base. Well, they're certainly not everybody, and they're not even the majority. Everybody says it's 30-something%. Well, where are the rest of the 50-something% of us, and why is it always about what he's doing for his base?
Great question. Thank you very much. And I think, Philip, you were starting to indicate before that it's because that's all he's got right
Right.
now, becoming so unpopular in most of the country. And so, in business, if you can't attract new customers,
Right.
you tend to try to get your same customers to buy more of your products
right.
or buy your product more times.
Recurring
right?
pledges, if you will. Right. No, I mean, I think the important thing to remember is
Hey,
that
that's
Donald
sustaining.
Donald Trump seems psychologically incapable of reaching across the aisle. I mean, like, quite literally, he doesn't seem to be able to have it within him to reach out to Democrats, to reach out to people who didn't vote for him. He has this base of support. He loves them. They got him. I mean, essentially, just a quick history is in order here. He came out hard on immigration. He built up a huge base of support really quickly, right? In a 17-person field, that was critical. That helped power him to the nomination. That helped power him to the presidency. He feels very loyal to them, and he doesn't feel any obligation to reach out to people across the aisle. The reason we keep talking about his base is because that's all that he's doing, is he's focusing on the base. And so we say he's focusing on the base because he's only focusing on the base. But there's a reason that he does it, and I think that it is, at some point, if he doesn't figure out how he is actually going to do things like say, hey, California, sorry, you're burning up, right? Things like that, little measures like that are significant, but he refuses to do it. And I think that tells us a lot about his presidency, and that also helps explain why he's doing the things he's doing.
Claire, do you have anything to add to this as a data watcher at 538? I mean, I wonder about the same question frequently that Sharon is asking, but then I see reports that seem to contradict this idea that Trump is so isolated, because you get all these potential primaries for open Republican Senate seats, or even Republican senators running for re-election, that seems to indicate that the base may be 30% or so of the electorate as a whole, but they've got a lot of, they've got majorities, voting majorities in many of the red states.
Yeah. So I think, Philip is right about midterm elections where the electorate is more conservative. Trump's base is older and white, and those are voters who come out and vote. So in some ways, it's not a silly strategy for him to keep the base happy.
So it might be 30% of the country, but it might be more than 30% of the electorate.
Correct. So sometimes when you look at polls, you want to look at not just American adults, but American voting adults, basically. That's one thing.
And that's how he got elected president.
That is. But I think one useful thing to keep in mind is beyond the midterms, perhaps, for why Trump won the election. He certainly won because he had his base, but he also won because he had, let's call them, do you guys remember Georgia 6th? He had Georgia 6 Republicans. So those are wealthier suburban voters who said, oh, listen, I don't want to vote for the Democrat. I'm going to hold my nose and vote for this guy. In some ways, if Trump wants to sustain a second term, he needs to win over those people, keep them charmed. So it's not just about the base. Some of this is intentional about just keeping sort of a vibrating wire, for the next 4 years or whatever it is.
And I know you've been reporting on the Senate more of late, but how about the CNN story that I referenced before? Trump allies worry that losing the House means impeachment. And the backdrop, I think, is a Cook Political Report survey that finds the Democrats with a slightly better than even chance of taking back the House, not the Senate, but the House. Does 538 have any handicapping along those lines yet?
Far be it from me to speak for the institution. But I think the Cook report that came out last week shows 45 competitive races. I think that's correct. And if the Democrats want to take the House, they need to win 33 of those. That's actually a push, I would say.
That's a lot.
And so I think Republicans have quite a lot of reasons to be optimistic, but also thinking about, if, let's say these indivisible groups that you see popping up, people refer to them as sort of the liberal Tea Party, will those actually churn an electoral advantage? The Tea Party was very effective in the midterms because, again, they had older white people activated, and those people are more likely than, let's say, younger people and minorities who maybe are riled up by Donald Trump's term in office. I think people are really waiting to see whether or not Democrats can turn some of this protest momentum into actual electoral advantage. And I still think that it's quite a lot of seats for the Democrats to win. So in some ways, the Republicans should be very conscious that impeachment is a big possibility if they lose the House, but they're in a decent position.
Because the House votes to impeach, which means force a president to stand trial in the Senate, for those who don't know. So who controls the House matters as the Mueller investigation results come in, and maybe other impeachment risks. Philip?
I would just note that that's absolutely correct, but I think that we sort of enter a weird period after the primaries next year. Obviously, every person in the House is up for a re-election next year. They all face primaries, or a lot of them will face primaries. After that, it becomes a wild card. If Donald Trump has done something that is particularly egregious, that people are overwhelmingly speaking out about, and people are worried, in moderate-leaning districts, if people are worried about getting reelected, there may be a bigger push then. I mean, people forget that when Richard Nixon was impeached was actually after, the summer right before the midterm elections in 1974. That was when the talk of impeachment really grew, because I think we could potentially see something similar next year once the primaries are out of the way.
Philip, can you explain some things about the two big moves of the last few days by the president on Obamacare and the Iran deal? On Iran, he decertified the agreement, but that doesn't mean the U.S. is withdrawing. Can you unpack that in plain English?
Right. Well, I mean, that's really the best summary, is that essentially, he understands that he can't simply withdraw from the pact without massive repercussions. So essentially what he did is he tried to kick it back to Congress. By doing decertification, Congress now has to determine whether or not this is something we're going to stick to. He's done this with some regularity, tried to kick things to Congress, because he likes to use Congress as a foil to some good effect. Obviously, he came into office saying, I'm going to repeal Obamacare on day one, and then after it didn't happen, he blames the Republican Senate all the time, and he blames Congress for that as well. I think that this is, to the point you made earlier, to some extent, this is the moderating effect of others in the White House on Donald Trump. I think that if Donald Trump had his way, he would undo everything right away, to the extent that he could. And the Post actually has a good story this morning about all the ways in which people try and guide him to where they hope he will go. It's almost like an adult daycare, if you will. No, that's not right. But that is the headline of our piece, so I feel comfortable in saying that.
And that is what Corker meant, right?
Yeah,
the White House
exactly
Chief of Staff, the Secretary of State, others are, no, we don't want to really do that.
Let's wait a week and see how you feel about it, that sort of thing.
Right. Did we have a question here in the green space? Did I see the microphone was moving in Amina's hands to somebody? There the person is. Hi.
Hi. Excuse me. I'm wondering if any of you could articulate how you see the Bannon-Trump values. And we can think of the values on the Democratic side as fairness, protection of public lands, equal access to education, employment, etc. But when Bannon says destruction of the administrative state, that just means like eradication of government. And how would you understand that, and how would you suggest that the base understands those as overarching values?
Mm-hmm.
Phil, you want to take a shot at that?
Sure. I think it's somewhat of a mistake to attribute to Steve Bannon a consistent ideology, right? I mean, I'm not joking. I
Really?
mean, his ideology is immigrants are bad, that, we should keep work in America through some vague means that doesn't somehow destroy the global economy. I mean, he has this very negative perception of how America works as a partner on the world stage, and that is, I think, the extent to which he cares about things. But then he couples that with his showmanship, right? I mean, he ran Breitbart. He got Breitbart pointed in all sorts of interesting directions, to use a sort of moderated word there, over the course of the campaign, even before he joined the Trump team. And so I think, to the extent that he has an ideology, it is that things are bad as they are, and we should change, in particular, how America interacts on the global stage and who America lets in.
And on Obamacare, undoing these cost-sharing subsidies for certain insurance policy buyers, maybe the first thing to say is don't panic if you're affected, because this doesn't take effect until 2019. Is that accurate?
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting political move from the standpoint of it sets you up for 2020. But yeah, these are subsidies that go to insurers so that they will provide better coverage to lower-income people. Basically, it means that they're going to have to raise their premiums so they can make up the cost that they were getting from the government. So it affects the deficit hugely in a negative way, but it's something that Trump wanted to do.
And Claire, I heard this morning that those cost-sharing subsidies go disproportionately to people in Trump voting states in the 2016 election. So there's some political risk there.
Certainly, yeah. But I think, to the audience member's question, people are a lot more forgiving of the Bannon-Trump ideology in some ways, because I think what we're experiencing now is sort of the financial crisis coming home to roost. So I think the groundwork was laid for an incredible distrust of American systems and businesses, and not incorrectly. I think people saw that a lot of people in the banking world were not punished with prison time. And there's a certain amount of, I think, vindictiveness and righteous anger in the American base in a lot of places, and American voters in a lot of places saying, well, I'm still feeling the effects, and I think there's a lot more radicalism among the voting base.
But they're not taking it out. I mean, that on paper is part of Steve Bannon's worldview, but they're not taking it out on Wall Street. They're taking it out on immigrants, right?
I think
they want to unleash Wall Street from parts of Dodd-Frank, this big tax cut for the rich that's being floated now. It's like they're looking away from all that, and they're focusing on what they see as the economic and cultural threat from allowing a lot of people of color into the United States.
I think that's because the United States is now, everyone knows this, it's a very partisan political environment right now, and you root for your team. And right now, those are the Republicans' policy goals, but the Republicans are also vocalizing and, let's say, marketing, having a good PR campaign to voice the anger that a lot of people feel. A lot of people, don't know the policy agenda, and I don't think that that's any dig about the intellect of the American public. It's just that people have a lot of stuff going on, and you sort of vote. It's a cultural, pheromonal, however we want to say it. You go with the guy that you think, it's with your gut. It's kind of like dating, right? You're kind of saying, this person seems to share my values. Right. And that's really true how a lot of politicians make hay.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's an element to this as well, which is that immigrants are a traditional historic foil, right? And that by pointing to immigrants as being bad and being the ones that are hurting the economy, this is a long-standing tactic. This is something that Steve Bannon and Breitbart had embraced last year as well. It's not an accident that they're being focused on, of course. I mean, there's this story in the New Yorker that just was published where Stephen Miller, who's the senior advisor to Donald Trump, he used to be friends with Richard Spencer, the white nationalist from Charlottesville, when they were in college. But Miller, essentially, the president had asked for a report on the economic effects of refugees. And so I believe it was HHS came back and said, yes, refugees actually add X billion dollars to the economy. And Stephen Miller's like, why don't you take another look at those numbers, right? And that's obviously not how it's supposed to work, but immigrants are a critical foil, and they are, as I said earlier, they are why Donald Trump, I think, was able to be successful over the course of the primaries by using them in that way. And
by the way, Claire, you mentioned the intelligence of the American voters. It's interesting, this meme with the word moron that seems to have broken out. And I think it actually started when Steve Bannon, campaigning for Roy Moore in Alabama, whipped up the crowd by saying, they, meaning the liberal elite, think you're morons. And then we heard, and I wonder if it was in response to that, that Secretary of State Tillerson privately called Donald Trump a moron. You think Tillerson came first?
I think Tillerson came first and the news broke later, but right. Perhaps simpatico thoughts of, I don't know. But yeah, there's certainly, it's like the deplorables with Clinton. There was sort of a reowning of that phrase.
And then it came out, the woman who leads the organization that won the Nobel Peace Prize last Friday, she had tweeted 2 days earlier, in response to the, what do you mean they call Trump a moron? She tweeted, Trump is a moron. So there's a lot of high-level moron calling going on here. Bannon and Tillerson and the Nobel Peace Prize winner for 2017. Claire, this Obamacare thing is an executive action because the Republican Senate has failed to pass an Obamacare repeal bill, obviously. Yeah. How does this time bomb the president just threw in there for 2019 potentially affect the elections in 2018?
Well, I think it is notable, as you said earlier, that it doesn't go into effect until after the midterm elections, and that's something that voters might...
Although I should say that based on that, as I understand the way Obamacare works, the insurance companies before Election Day next year will announce their rate hikes.
Right, yeah. That's right. Yeah.
And if the rate hikes are much bigger, as is predicted, based on the elimination of these cost-sharing subsidies, people are going to know.
Yeah. I do think healthcare in general, Trump probably wanted to take some sort of action, a death by 1,000 cuts kind of action, because a lot of donors, GOP donors, are very upset that there has been no healthcare legislation that's gone through. I believe they saw a big dip in not just in small donor dollars, but also big donor funds right after the last failure of the healthcare bill. So in some ways, this is a political imperative for Republicans. I think they see it as that as for the 2018 midterms.
We have 30 seconds left. Claire, you're going to get the last word. We didn't get into Dianne Feinstein, possibly having her seat threatened. That's to some degree from within her own party, from the progressive movement within the Democratic Party that's finding her too establishment in her own right from a Democratic standpoint? Are we going to see, like, Bannon nationalists all over the Republican primaries? Are we going to see Bernie progressives all over the Democratic primaries?
You might. I mean, Feinstein is an interesting example because she's a lot more conservative than the California base. I'd say it's a little bit open season in both parties, although the Democrats might have a little bit more of a practical need to rally behind their flag, although Feinstein is, I think, in for an interesting race this year.
Clare Malone, senior political writer for 538. Philip Bump, Washington Post correspondent. Please thank them, everybody. Thank you very much. Brian Lehrer on WNYC. We continue live from the green space in a minute.